So we're here today, obviously, to talk about Occupy and its connection with art. The philosopher Chomsky just called, I haven't come across this before, he called Occupy the first major public response to 30 years of class warfare. And when we talk about politics, it seems like it doesn't, there's a kind of elephant in the room. And for me, that's very often the media. So instead of it remaining the elephant in the room, I think in general, discussions about politics and art should almost begin with the media, such a conversation. Because it's usually the media that determines the outcomes of whatever is going on. And usually that means the status quo gets reinforced or sometimes degraded. And I think very often the media reveals its corporate character through censorship, that is in its choice of which stories they run or not. They would call this editorial expression. I would call it censorship if all of the major news services in other countries are dealing with a particular story. So again, all of this has much to do with art and relevant issues in that sphere. To continue to talk about the media, I would say that of course only the naive would believe that the media is neutral anywhere. I think it was 150 years ago, it was said that the free press exists for those who own a press. And I think that's never been more true than it is now. And I think the biggest lie that's pushed by the right is that we have a media that's hopelessly liberal. And I think in fact it's pretty easy to suggest precisely the opposite. I think this is the biggest lie of all, and I think we see it in action all the time. I think the media is so outrageously right-wing now that if ACT UP existed, it couldn't gain any attention. It wouldn't exist now, which is really a horrifying idea. And I think we saw this in a more timely way in Charlotte at the Democratic Convention, which I think they picked Charlotte and Tampa because there are really no major media outlets there. There's not much media production for cities of that size, so I think that was at least the secondary reason those cities were chosen. And if you happen to see, I don't know, how many of you saw perhaps the Monday of the Republican? No, this is just before the Democratic Convention in Charlotte. I don't know if it was Sunday or Monday, the day before. There was an Occupy demonstration, a huge one. Anybody aware of this? Because I saw it on some glitch on public television, and I saw it for about 2 minutes, and it was clear there were 1,000 people that you could see the 3 minutes of coverage, and that was the last thing that I heard about it. So similarly, the mainstream media, quote-unquote mainstream, the coverage of the anniversary of Occupy has been elegiac, and as phony as the coverage was at the outset. It seemed that the mainstream media picked up right where it left off, like, where's the agenda, why aren't you taking over the Democratic Party? Or in other words, where's the money? And I think this is quite typical of the media. Why would it matter, Democrats or Republicans, unless you were running candidates? The relationship between Occupy and those entities. And it seems to me that everybody knows the general philosophy behind Occupy. So I don't think any candidates were busy knocking on the doors for endorsements. And what I think it is that media people just don't get it about the kind of slow educational work it takes to organize something, because they've never had to do anything like this. And it just doesn't sell advertising. It's been 50 years since media theorists have suggested that it's conflict that animates television, whether it's Jerry Springer or whether it's war. These are the things that get picked up. So if there was no formal agenda by Occupy, there certainly was, I could point to lots of what I think are accomplishments on the order of Occupy diverted attention from the Tea Party and its hypocrisies. It gave Obama the cover to really pursue his natural inclination, I think, to champion equality. And if so, I think you could make a case that if he wins, that this will be the major reason that he will win, in spite of economic uncertainties. And I think it's another reminder that Obama desperately needs pressure from the left in order to even do anything in the center that he's inclined to do. So, okay. In the realm of art, I think it's more complicated and unclear about what effect media had on visual art. I think visual art is such a complex form of knowledge that it's either even hard to define what visual art is. I think 3 of the 4 people on the panels will have really different ideas about what they're even calling art. So I will leave that to them and to you. And I think those, that would mean art as design, art as communications or journalism or media, or art as the creation of beautifully crafted objects that would be available in the gallery. So it's a very kind of diverse field. What you're looking at here is one of those unclassifiable works by an artist named Jeff Gates, who's long been involved with something. He started years and years ago that was called Artists FBI, which is Artists for a Better Image. And he was he teaches at the Maryland Institute. He comes out of a visual art tradition, mainstream one. And this was what was great about this work was, and he's got lots of attention for it, is it's up in the Washington Metro right now. He forked out the money to ensure that distribution of this was good, so it's all over the Metro. It's called the Chamomile Tea Party. And obviously Jeff's learned a lot from ACTA making this, sort of like 80s activist poster tradition, quote unquote. So I think it's really wonderful. It reminded me what he did when I looked up at some of the works in the posters and the graphics in the show. It made me question how many of these got distributed. Were they up in time before the event that they were describing and inviting you to? How do we evaluate the effectiveness of those sorts of works? So I think there's lots of questions that, like the ones I just mentioned, rarely get raised. So my worldview proceeds from the idea that it's more important to ask questions than to answer. But when these wrong questions are asked, it makes conversations difficult. So before I segue to our panelists and encourage them to offer their views, I want to offer one statement and one question that represents 2 of my kind of personal bottom lines. And the statement is that bad political art is both bad politics and bad art. And finally, and I have to tip my hat here to Richard Kamler, a collaborator of mine, a really wonderful artist. Finally, I would encourage you to think about what Occupy might look like, try to visualize it. And that image that, because we are people, and this is sort of complex form of knowledge we deal in, and is that image an image of collaboration and sharing, maybe an equitable appropriation of 1%, or is it an image of the barbarians and the gatekeepers, taking what belongs to you? So meditate on that one when you're in the shower tonight. We introduce the panelists. And while we hold questions for the end, we're going to keep presentations to 10 minutes and to make sure there's lots of time for discussion. And if you didn't pick up one of these have the pretty long biographies of each panelist. And I wanted to do this because I think you really, before you hear a speaker speak, it doesn't really matter what they do. You know so much. You may not want to remember them, or you may want to remember them after you hear them speak. And it takes a long time to rattle off a list of credits, especially when panelists are as accomplished as this group is. So, and on the left side of that is something I felt was kind of a homage to Occupy. So, our first panelist is Jeff Jones on my immediate left, and I would say Jeff's been a really important guy in local politics. He's up politics more than visual art. And you can read the many things he's been involved in, whether it's the Arts Democratic Club or the City Arts Equity Program or now the Career Cultural Center. So, Jeff Jones.
Hi, it's good to see you all today. And I want to start by saying that it's been 1 year since Occupy first appeared. And I remember I was in New York when it first happened. And it made me start thinking about how do we look at the Occupy through the lens of Occupy, the arts and culture in the United States. And after I thought about that for a while, it started to become very clear to me that the same kind of disparities that we see in the tax structure and in the economy and in the so-called democracy that is really a pay-to-play game, that those same inequities that we see there, we see in the system that this country uses to fund art and culture. And if you bear with me, this may have a lot of statistics that may just fly by you. I will try and slow down to some degree. So anyway, I started looking at the Occupy movement, the arts and culture system here, through the lens of Occupy. And it didn't take me long to see the connection. For starters, most American cities' arts agencies use excessive amounts of taxpayer dollars to subsidize corporate arts events for the 1%. And foundations, who are supposedly acting on all our behalf, do the same thing. In 2011, there was a study done by the Committee for Responsive Philanthropy that pointed out that in the state of California, the 30 largest arts grants that were given by foundations were all awarded to white arts organizations serving rich people. Maybe a few of them serve middle income. But the Committee for Responsive Philanthropy concluded that the foundations are funneling billions of dollars to arts organizations serving a shrinking audience of mostly rich white patrons. And this is really obvious in a lot of ways once you start looking at it. So despite San Francisco's progressive reputation, and despite the fact that this city funds the arts more per capita than any other city in the United States, San Francisco is really the rule rather than the exception to the rule. For example, in 2010-11, the San Francisco Opera, Ballet, Symphony, Museum of Modern Art, the American Conservatory Theater, and the De Young Museum, 6 organizations whose boards and audiences are overwhelmingly white, affluent, and well-educated, received over 60% of the dollars that the city of San Francisco awarded to fund cultural activities. The city also provides 4 of these organizations buildings that nobody else can use. It's basically a pay-to-play system. The city annually hands over more than $8 billion of the taxpayers' money to the 11-member War Memorial Board. I don't know if you know this institution, but this is a city-appointed, there's a former member of the War Memorial Board who just walked in. This institution gets $8 million from the city to run the Opera House and the Louisa Davis Symphony Hall. And these individuals who are appointed by the mayor, although I know Marie is one of the exceptions to this group, maybe the only one, the people who are on that board historically are the major contributors to the mayor's political campaigns. So these people who are then on this War Memorial Board, they set the cultural policies that turn these buildings that are owned by the citizens into essentially institutions that only rich people can afford to go to. And here's some ballet lovers and opera lovers and symphony people. Those are the only people who get to go as audience members to these institutions paid for by the tax dollars and owned by the city. For example, on the San Francisco Opera's website, you can find amazing information. And it shows you exactly who the taxpayers' dollars are serving. Here's a few facts. A single box seat costs $330. Now, who here has ever gone to the opera by yourself? Think about that. For an evening out at the opera, if you're going to sit in a box seat, it's going to cost you probably $660. A ticket in the orchestra section only costs $263. And if you want to pay for less than $100, you can sit in the extreme balcony or the side balconies where, you know, that's generally referred to as the nosebleed section of the opera house. A majority of opera ticket buyers, the people who are being subsidized here, a majority of them have masters or PhDs, and 91% are college graduates. Almost 80% of the opera's audience lives in households making $75,000 a year or more. And at the conclusion of 2009, the opera had an endowment of $175 million. And yet, the city feels compelled to hand over money to the opera, and people of color, queer arts organizations get really the crumbs that are left. The irony here is that the average San Francisco resident cannot afford to attend the events taking place in these venues that they own. And so by default, these buildings are used exclusively by the 1%. To my knowledge, the last time a music performance for the masses took place at the Opera House was in 1979. Perhaps if you're old enough, you remember a certain disco diva named Sylvester. Sylvester held a concert at the Opera House that was sold out. And about 1 month later, the War Memorial Board fired the executive director of the Opera House, who was gay, on the grounds that this event was not appropriate for the Opera House, even though it was still there. In addition to the Opera House, the War Memorial Board also runs Louise M. Davies Symphony Hall, where another organization with audience demographics very similar to the opera's annually receives even larger city subsidies. They have an endowment of $240 million. That's $250 million they already have in the bank. And yet, the symphony annually receives taxpayer subsidies of $5 million, over $2.5 million from the War Memorial Board, an additional $600,000 grants for the art. And the best part is that there is an ordinance that was adopted back in the Depression that awards 1/10 of 1 cent of every property tax dollar paid to the city of San Francisco, to the San Francisco Symphony. Just think about what that means. So, like the opera, the symphony has an annual budget around $60 million. So here's one of the questions that I have. If the opera's budget is about, I'm looking for the exact statistics. If the opera's budget is approximately $70 million a year, and they have 80 performances, that means that every time the curtain goes up at the Opera House, it costs $900,000 to entertain 3,000 people who are sitting in the seats. That is an extremely expensive piece of entertainment. And it's paid for largely with, you know, taxpayer dollars are what subsidizes these activities. And I wonder if this art form is sustainable, because it's becoming more and more and more expensive every single year. And they're cutting back on the number of performances because they just can't afford to pay the amount of money that opera now costs. So, as it turns out, ultimately we have to ask questions about why does this situation continue? How is it that the city can spend the taxpayers' dollars on arts activities that the average taxpayer can't afford to attend? And when you think about it, it's very similar to what happens in Washington. Here in San Francisco, the major arts institutions have hired a lobbyist And they pay this lobbyist to go down to City Hall and make sure that nothing changes, that the status quo is protected and that nothing changes. And it's been that way for many years. The last time there was any change in the system occurred back in 1989 when there was a number of complaints about discrimination in cultural arts funding, because at that time the entire Asian American, African American, Latino, and Native American and LGBT arts organizations got about 12% of grants for the arts money. Now it's moved up to about 20. But they only give away 10 million of the 38 million that the city gives away. And it's very similar, this situation that prevails here, where the major arts institutions hire a lobbyist. It's very similar to the way the federal government operates, where lobbyists maintain these totally obscene subsidies to the oil companies and to the pharmaceutical companies and big agriculture and to the health insurance. So the result of this controversy back there in 1989 was the establishment of the Cultural Equity Grants Program. And for the past 17 years, this program has awarded about $2 million a year to everyone else who previously was excluded from the arts funding system. And I just wanted to mention what cultural equity is. Cultural equity is not a situation that exists. It's a goal. It's something out there. And it really represents an alternative culturally to the corporate-dominated culture that we see on television and that we see that most cities and foundations support. It's an alternative cultural paradigm of American culture. And it's also a social justice issue. It's a strategy to build a diverse society. And it really is sort of the cultural paradigm that reflects what California and the United States ultimately is destined to become. Cultural equity promotes the creation of American art that reflects the lives and experiences of the nation's culturally diverse residents. Cultural equity assumes that relevant and compelling arts programs can serve all communities, that the arts and artists can promote social change, and that the arts can launch public dialogue that transcend the boundaries of race, gender, class, age, ability, and sexual orientation. So there is an alternative here. But rather than investing the majority of the city's cultural dollars in arts events that almost exclusively serve the 1%, the mayor, the board of supervisors, and grants for the arts could adopt cultural policies and practices that equitably distribute the city's cultural resources. Unfortunately, none of the city's elected officials responsible to these policies ever raise these questions. They pretend that it really isn't happening, that there is no contradiction between taking the taxpayers' money and handing it off to arts organizations that are entertaining the 1%. Thank you very much.
This is Lincoln from Cushing. I guess this is the page or panel. First one's having a historical background.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Far away there. I'm not going to talk about art that much, really, as much as cultural forms, because what I work with is posters. And I think of posters as a cultural form that is sort of a more democratic medium. It's don't look, come here. So I just wanted to raise a few points since I was invited to participate in this panel. I was really thinking about what is it that Occupy, and I actually hesitate to call it a movement. I think it's more of a manifestation, but it's clearly an upswelling of resistance that needs some focusing, and it's really an important movement. And I think that the class nature of it is one of its most significant qualities. I think that the 1%, 99% is a little simplistic, but it gets the idea across that our country is divided in class, even though it may not be aware of that. And that raising that as an issue, and raising that as a motive force for what's wrong with this country is something that hasn't been raised in this country for a very long time, since really the 30s, which is when, oddly enough, there used to be massive funding for the arts in the form of things like the Federal Arts Project, and it put artists to work. Unemployed artists were being put to work teaching things like screen printing. And people discovered, artists discovered this democratic medium. Screen printing, oh my God, we can make multiples, we can teach people how to do it. It was a wonderful tool for making art accessible to the public. And it's the art form that I've always been most engaged with, and I've also gone from making it to trying to study it and understanding it. So I make the distinction between posters and prints, in that prints are multiples on paper, but they're more private. They're made to go to a gallery or be sold. Whereas a poster is really made to be posted. It's a democratic tool for discourse. It's just like a micro-power radio station. It's like somebody standing up on a soapbox. It's like a repasted mural. It's a democratic tool that has a cultural component. So when I was looking at what's going on with Occupy, and sort of absorbing what's the resonance about what's going on here culturally, one thing was there were new media. There's new ways of playing with this stuff. Technical difficulties. Okay, so part of it is it's a mass operation. You've got people out on the streets, and so you need something that works at scale. Oh, we're moving forward now. Don't look, don't look. Okay. So you have something that has to operate in a public scale, which is really a democratic form. You want to have something at least in multiples. You have something that people can see as a group. Oh, this is okay. So I'll just talk and we'll let the pictures occupy themselves. So public forms of art that I think were really clever and innovative and really worked in the public settings. So things like big banners on balloons, like that. And then next slide. This wasn't actually from Occupy, but one thing you got to realize is that Occupy is one manifestation among many. There was a whole workers' resistance going on a year before this around what's been cutbacks in federal wages, cutbacks in government services, and so on. So there have been several movements and manifestations that have all culminated currently in what we think of as Occupy, which started off as Occupy Wall Street and of course spread around the country to here. But this is a cultural form which I find fascinating, which is mud stencils, where you use an ephemeral medium to make a public message that can be washed away. It's not destroying public property, it's not destroying private property, it's environmentally benign. It's a very clever approach to getting a message out in multiples. You whip out these giant stencils. Next slide. There we go. So this chalk walk. Well, chalk, again, is an ephemeral medium. It's something you can do in public, and people in LA got busted for doing this. It is illegal to chalk on federal property, for example, even though it's chalk. So what you see here is the public space is contested terrain. If you're an artist or a cultural worker, if you want to do something in public, your options are fewer and fewer and fewer. And so even doing chalk on a sidewalk in certain places can get you arrested. So this was just recently in LA. A bunch of artists went out with big fat pieces of chalk and they did a whole chalk walk, just like an art walk, but it was political art in the form of chalk expressions in the public space. Next. Oh, there we go. So again, here, just the idea of climbing up a telephone pole or a light pole and hanging a big banner. It's almost street spectacle. It's something where the presentation of the art is just as much part of the form as the fine banner itself. And so people were applauding as people would be climbing up, shooting up these poles and hanging these giant banners. And it was a way of reclaiming public space, which is an empowering thing. So you have a combination of visual art and street theater mashed together. So what you start to see is some of these things that were happening with Occupy were very empowering public forms of cultural expression. Next. So that's sort of modern media that are playing. I'm not dealing with YouTube and Twitter, I'm just dealing with visual art forms that are in my frame of reference. Another thing is classic media, which I think of as posters and prints and so forth. There was a whole revival of people making screen prints. So this is John Paul Bale screen printing, and there were other people. This is Occupy Oakland. There was the Great Tortilla Conspiracy, printing on tortillas. Printed stuff. And you think, well, wow, posters are pretty ephemeral. Well, if you want to go look at a Twitter from last week or a website from a year ago, that's pretty ephemeral too. And so if you notice, the line for people to get posters was as long as the line for people to get food. People want to have something like this in their hands, a tangible representation of that movement. They go home, they put that on their wall, they send it off to their uncle in Tulsa. They have an object that is relatively persistent, and in a week or in a month or in 10 years, they can look at that and go, oh yeah, I remember that, I was there. They can tell their friends about it. These have a very functional role that transcends sort of what we think of as art. They also serve as a way to raise money. Very often in an organization, they produce prints and sell those, and again, people will buy something that's handmade. We all know that there's a real thirst for do-it-yourself, for craft, and so there's an interest in handmade objects, and it was fascinating watching this going on. Next. But you'll notice that there's also now artists now are pretty informed about their recent history, about movement history. When we were making posters in the 60s, there had been a 20-year lull in poster making. The Cold War had put a slam on many forms of public art. There was song, there was dance, and so forth. But the civil rights movement didn't have any posters. The free speech movement, Berkeley, had no posters. That as an art form did not really spring up until the mid-60s in the Bay Area because of the cultural scene. But French Achorka, who was a Bay Area artist, he'd come back from the civil rights movement in the South. He created this iconic clenched fist. But here we have two examples of the Occupy movement picking up on this iconic image and running with it. And so what you start to see here is a consciousness about the history of this. Now these artists may not have known the history of this fist. I mean, I've got a whole website about the history of the clenched fist, but at least people have access to a lot more recent history of movement materials from the civil rights movement, from ACTA, from the anti-war movement. All of these different movements contribute this long arc of art history that artists now are very aware of and draw upon it and are much more informed than artists were when they were doing that in the mid-60s and 70s. They didn't have that immediate background to jump on. They were grabbing at all sorts of other forms of art, but they didn't have an immediate local political art to grab at. Next. And so what I want to move on to is the other part. So that's the creation of visual art that I think is one of the really powerful manifestations that we've seen coming out of Occupy. The other component of that is what happens to this stuff. I right now am an archivist. My job is gathering material, preserving it, and cataloging it, and then making sure the public sees it. It's a different function than what happens in an art gallery like this. Stuff goes through here and goes back out. They don't keep anything here. I work right now partly at the Oakland Museum of California. I'm writing on a giant collection of political posters that's 24,000 posters, mostly from 1965 until now. But that creates our own history. That was pulled together by a veteran of the free speech movement who said, this is a great way to teach about our own movements. And if we don't do it, and if we don't do it right, nobody else is going to do it. And so there was a lot of controversy about, well, what should happen to these materials, and should they go to the Hoover Institution? Oh no, that's not a good place for them to go. But other places that are much more public. So what I want to raise is there's a range of institutions where stuff goes. And I know I work with a scholar back in New York who's had a hell of a time getting the Occupy Wall Street people to say, yeah, we'll turn over our material because there's an anti-authoritarian component to the Occupy movement. The idea is that they go into an institution, well, I don't want that. But we've got to grab that bull by the horns and say, look, there are different kinds of institutions. And some institutions are community-based, and they are really serving people. Other institutions are more, larger, have better funding, they're less responsive to the public, but they also have resources that the community-based ones don't. There's a spectrum. But we've got to accept that if we don't start gathering on history, adding the content to it, it's going to get mistold, and it's not going to get told at all. And so the role of this kind of material, all of the tweets, the Twitters, the websites, the balloons, the posters, that stuff has to be part of what scholars draw on in 1 year, in 10 years, in 100 years to understand what's going on now. So it's our job to push It's our job to push those boundaries and say, yes, we're willing to accept the fact that even though what we're doing may be just for the moment, you don't think about what's going to happen later, it really does matter eventually because that feeds our long cultural history. We need to know this stuff. We need to be informed because other people have done things cleverly, well, and there's nothing wrong with reinventing the wheel. A lot of art does that. But it's nice to be informed about it, and it's nice to be able to share that because that means a stronger reader. So this is the exhibition I've been working with at the Oakland Museum that just closed down. It showed this broad, rich tapestry of just the Bay Area stuff. Where we go, I had no idea that there were Native American poster makers. There's a whole history here that's really, really strong. And if we don't know it, we're weak. So I've been told to keep it to 10 minutes, and we'll answer more questions later. Thank you.
Which is probably good. Yeah. people to have a relationship to something else that they weren't accustomed to. And as a result, their perspective would be altered from what they saw.
The economy as well, so I work on these objects. So the next project that I want to talk about is more about media and conflict and images in particular. And this is an installation that I made, and I was really interested in kind of breaking that boundary as well between photography always being on the wall to create something that was more of an immersive space. So this installation used all sources from mass media online about conflict. So the wallpaper on the right is actually from an image of a missile going up into the air. It's a night vision goggle that was through night vision photography that was taken. And it was one of the first images that was sent out to all sorts of newspapers and magazines and online sources about the beginning of the Iranian-born. If you wouldn't mind, please, thank you. And so I used one image and multiplied it to make the pattern. The four drawings of explosions that deal with war, basically. So it's going backwards again. Why is it doing that? Alright. Yeah. So what I wanted to do was to make these objects that when you stood in front of it, it would kind of cover your peripheral vision. So they came off the wall. And in this particular one, I used two sources. So if you move to the next slide, please. You'll see that one is an image that illustrates articles about female suicide bombers. And it's really interesting for me because the images were from both sides of the media. So it was pro and against suicide bombing. And I paired it up with an image of Paris Hilton. If you go next, you can see that. And for me, what was really interesting is that even though these two figures were so worlds apart, completely separated, they were represented by media in the same way, in that they only had a singular account of them being shown. So that when you think about a figure like Paris Hilton, you really can only imagine them in one way. And in the same thing, this woman who was caught, she didn't actually she wasn't able to go through with it. Is only seen in only one light. So next, please. Okay, so one of the things that I also try to do is repeat and images to kind of allude to the way that with media, all these panels, all these screens that are always around us, they kind of do repeat a lot of the same images and they kind of settle into us, which is why the posters in such projects are so important to counteract those things that we see normally presented to us over and over again. So next, please. Thank you so much for doing this. It was really important for me to use these patterning that somewhat looks like African designs, but also sometimes like Islamic ornamentation. I'm from Iran, so I wanted to reference that. But at the same time, I was reading a book that spoke about how cultures in Africa who didn't have written language would use patterns to tell stories, but also to demonstrate the relationships of their societies, the structures of hierarchy and such. So this was discovered by anthropologists when the men in one particular society who was making these beaded belts moved out to go to mines and work in the mines, and so the role of women had to change. And so did these patterns. And I was thinking a lot about how patterns works are what we kind of place ourselves within, and how media and our relationship to the visual image can play a role in that. So next. On the left, the piece is called State Prism, and for the source of that image, I used images released from the Department of Defense website. Basically, in 1991, during the first Gulf War, Bush Sr. made it illegal to have any images of fallen soldiers coming back, wounded soldiers. And so this particular image shows the caskets that are coming back with the draped flags. And it was a university professor from the University of Delaware that, through the Freedom of Information Act, requested that they be released. And so for the first time, they were released in 2005. So when they were released, the images were redacted. You can see the face of the person blacked out. There's about 500 that were released, and they were all blacked in different ways, and sometimes way bigger, so that it would render them useless to be printed again or published again. So this is why I wanted to use them to kind of regain and to repurpose the images for ourselves. So next. This last piece that I'm going to talk about for the installation kind of stood in as the camera for me. So you could view at least two versions of a subject, the candle in real life burning and a video of it burning. And when you look through the lens, it magnified it, so it allowed you to have a kind of more, maybe closer relationship to it. But at the same time, through the act of kind of bending and looking, the viewer became aware of the frame that limited the perspective. Okay, so that's another little bit. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about how I carried across making the work for this exhibition and Occupy. So I've always been an activist my whole life, and I found it really difficult to be so removed from what was going on in the Middle East with the Arab Spring. I found that I was just consuming it through media, through online reading, and it was really hard for me. I really wanted to go there and participate, even though it was happening in my own country, really. And so I was in Europe, and when I came back in September, Occupy had started, and I was really thrilled and very excited. And I wanted to connect more, so I have been going to Occupy events and to the camps since it began. I spent the fall in New York, which was amazing, and documented it, because I think it was really important to have a source of who are these people, what are they doing. But at the same time, I wanted to make a piece or make a series that would speak to a larger audience. And so with that, I came to make this project. Next, I started to pair up images of the Arab Spring with the Occupy movement, to intertwine them, to speak about how everyone's struggle is kind of the same struggle. We just want to make a better world for ourselves, our children, our communities, and so, and how they inform one another. So if you just pause, you see that this is one of the first pieces I made, and the bottom, the lighter part of the image, you can see is Mohammed Bouazizi in Tunisia, the fruit seller who set himself on fire, who basically kind of started the Arab Spring, paired up with people from Amsterdam, Occupy, who were burning fake dollar bills that they printed. So it's good. Okay, next. You go forward, and I'll just talk over it. This is another piece. It's from the New York Times website and a newspaper, an online newspaper in Toronto. And so it's Occupy Toronto with the Cairo. And so I wanted to kind of reclaim these sources and play with them, but also to imagine how today with media and technology, we're so connected, and how we can actually help one another through the experience of building a movement. some people, when I was in New York, some people came in from Egypt, we can go to the next slide, to help with the organization. Right now, my partner and I are working with people in Spain who are occupying and building a directory of occupations. There's 1,480 occupations worldwide right now, and you can check them out on directory.occupy.net. So next. It's really amazing because you can go and see their movement and what they're doing. Sometimes groups are like 5 strong, sometimes they're hundreds, and it's amazing what they do. Kind of follow their Twitter and such. And this is a piece that's upstairs. Next. And so what was really interesting for me is to kind of connect that to my own Persian heritage and Iranian background. The series is titled Conference of the Birds. And the story of that is the 12th century poet Attar wrote about these birds. It's this beautiful long poem that basically has as its premise that the birds of the world need a leader. They're leaderless, so they come together in this conference to find themselves a leader, and amongst them they feel like there's no one there that can represent them. And they think of this mythical bird creature called basically Seymour, and it's basically a phoenix figure. And so they decide that they want to fly through all of these lands to find the great Seymour, and when they finally get there to his residence, they find only a lake, and they gather together, and they look in the lake, and they see their own reflection. And so I thought that was a really positive way of imagining how we can come together as a group and maybe build something better. In Persian, the word Seymour can be translated as dirty birds. So it's kind of like how that works. So that's how I come to title the project. Thank you.
Our last panelist is Jake Levitas, who is one of the founders of Occupy Design and works here in San Francisco. And our informal baby.
Hi. Thanks for coming, guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience this year being part of Occupy, as well as the project that is starting called Occupy Design, and sort of the course it's taken over the past year since September, when it all began. If you're not familiar with the project, it was really about connecting graphic designers and occupiers on the street around the world. We felt that it was a critical time, and that the imagery very quickly of the movement was not being represented accurately. It was being dismissed by the media because of a sense of sort of like hopelessness, a sense of like discombobulation, if that's a technical term, disorder, things, non-professionalism for some reason, which was expected from a leaderless movement. And we wanted to build images that were able to captivate people, that looked like people had their act together, which everyone did. As soon as you dig one layer beneath these thousands of people holding cardboard signs, you realize there's an entire governments being set up, there's meetings being set up, there's connections that are happening all over the world that were not being portrayed. It was an incredibly complex organism, really. So a lot of our images looks like this. We had a specific focus on information design and iconography, because icons are a universal language tool, and information design is something that can be translated into other languages as well, but data and statistics are also universal tools in the sense that numbers can be translated to anyone, and a lot of the information behind the movement was not being portrayed accurately in the media as well. Why are people doing this after all? We knew that the arguments were strong. We knew that if you look at the numbers, everyone, the 99% were right. And why was that not being portrayed? Why did you have to present both sides of a story if one of the sides of the story is complete crap. So we did stuff like this. Taking graphs and making them a little bit more appealing, it's a real basic term. I want to talk a little bit about the philosophy of the project, how it progressed, and some things we learned from it. So we started with a few simple theories. One is that simplicity is greater than complication. And we saw pictures like this coming out from occupations very quickly. Thousands of signs conveying 1,000 different messages. And what was one of the best parts of the movement, I think, was the diversity. I should say. The number of different viewpoints, vantages, backgrounds that were tolerated and that were made able to feel a part of this was staggering. No one was ever rejected, and I think there was some difficulties with that by saying, we don't have a single message. We have a united group of people who are each communicating their own messages within a common framework. But that's not a soundbite, that's not something you can put on CNN and put in the ticker. So that didn't really make it to the mainstream so much. So we saw lots of these types of signs where people took boxes and wrote stuff on them. But we also got people making signs like this. And that made it, honestly harder for the other messages to come across, because when you're someone in the media, you can take an image like this and put it next to, just portray this instead of anything else. You can have a visual filter which says that we're going to portray these guys as a bunch of hippies who are just want to weed, not greed, and we're going to forget that there are completely legitimate and startling underpinnings to this movement. So this was a Mad magazine that came out, image which stereotypes this exact thing, or made fun of it. Screw you, Mr. CEO, unless you're hiring because I need a job and a shower or whatever. Don't bail out Wall Street, bail out the porta potty on Fulton Street, and stuff like that. This was sort of like the caricature of the movement. I thought this sign was really powerful. Facts are great, solutions are beautiful, action is golden, and we wanted to bring out some more signage that focused on all of these things, facts, solutions, and action. The second thing that we assumed sort of from the beginning was that data would be greater than talking points, or more valuable, that it's a lot harder to argue with a statistic than it is a broad message that can be generalized and misinterpreted. So we saw people carrying around stuff like this, right? Eat the rich. That's a great talking point, but it's really easy to pick apart, and we wanted to show people, instead, free speech, motherfucker. Like, there were people carrying around signs like this, and we want to show people not just we can say eat the rich, but should we instead be saying here's how much the rich is eating you, and over what time period, and which demographics, and etc. So it becomes something much more nuanced and something much more specific than a talking point that allows you to stereotype a person. Thirdly, we thought that new tools would be greater than old tools, or at least would take advantage of a newfound potential. This is not the first time people are fighting for these causes. This picture is from, I think, the 20s, in the workers' rights struggle, before there was a 40-hour work week, before there was reasonable pay for everyone. And you can see similar signage happening almost a century ago. But this was the first movement where we had Wi-Fi in a park, where we had laptops, like a command center console set up where you could communicate with the entire world instantaneously. It was unbelievable to get messages from Zuccotti, people directly. They were publishing a newspaper, the Occupied Wall Street Journal, and we were able to get content in there for the next issue, in 2 days, despite having never met any of these people and having no other connection to them other than we have some stuff, could we put it in your paper, and then all of a sudden the dialogue has begun. It was really fascinating. This was a picture from their spring. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about the influence of social media and the internet and things like that, so I won't go into it. But needless to say, imagery like this, which was translated from across the world at the same time, contemporaneously with what's going on here, made everything feel so much stronger. And the ability to communicate imagery like this was something that the social movement has never seen before. So we realized that for the first time ever, we have widespread access to professional design tools, and a means to distribute designs instantaneously anywhere in the world. And this is fundamentally a different paradigm than we've been operating with at any other point, in any other movement, in the history of the world. It's really fascinating, and we thought that would be a good launching point for a project. So we thought that design was important, and that the context of where we came about this was also important. This was when we started the project. Shit hits the fan. Protesters took over the Brooklyn Bridge. It was amazing. I remember in San Francisco when this was going on, it was like Beta Breakers, Pride, and like the Giants won the World Series, sort of all in one. If you were in the right community, anyway. I mean, all of my friends were calling me up, like, "Oh man, what are we gonna do? This is crazy. I don't know where to put all this energy. I know that I want to do something," and that's how we felt too. This was some of the traffic search volume about Occupy over time, and so obviously there was a huge spike last fall, and it dropped off somewhat after that. I think more importantly was to show that just how much it became a story. So the origins of this project happened at the exact peak of that story, and it was really timely, I guess. This was a post that I put out October 8th last year. Drop whatever you're doing, whatever you plan to do today. Pay attention to Occupy Wall Street. This is the biggest leaderless movement since 1999, and it will continue to grow exponentially. It is literally the most important thing happening in the world right now, perhaps in our lifetimes. 800 cities are participating. Take it seriously and thoughtfully consider what you can do to help. I posted this myself before I had thoughtfully considered what I could do to help. I had no idea what I was going to do. I just knew that I wanted to be involved. And October 12th, which was 4 days later, my friends put together an event, which was a hackathon, which is where you spend a weekend like producing new digital tools. So this came together in like 3 days, and we had zero. The event didn't exist, and 3 days later there were 65 people signed up. People who knew how to program, people who knew how to design, stuff like that. Fast forward past the weekend, when I sort of took this idea, had amazing people join my team. It was really exciting, and on Monday, because of this giant surge in the media coverage for this specific topic at this specific time, we got a great article written up in Good, and 20,000 people visited the site in 2 days after it launched, and it was unbelievable. I had no idea this would happen. I mean, again, it was like an idea in my head on Thursday, and on Monday we were like getting calls from Bulgaria about like we need a poster designed, and it's like I had no time to process what was going on. It was completely fascinating, and I think a really, really interesting application of just how quickly this stuff can grow. It's almost like unbelievably fast. Like there's no way that you can comprehend how fast this movement grew. First of all, that there was suddenly 1 million people interconnected on social media and online within a month or two of this thing starting around the world. It was completely unbelievable. October 25th, a week later, we got our first infographic signs in Zuccotti Park. So we had friends print out these 20 by 30, 4 foot by 5 foot signs and hang them over the tent, so it looked something like this. And that was really exciting to get these pictures back from New York and say, again, not only can we design these things, but someone in Amsterdam can print this out, somebody in Japan can print this out, and they can do the same. We can pull designs from them. It was really exciting to see how this imagery could be like replicated. So we got, I think about hundreds of submissions came in. We started getting like 600 submissions over the course of the project. We released a design toolkit so that anyone could build things in this common imagery using this font and design templates. So we kind of opened that process up, and then this was we ran a design contest with Good eventually that this was the winning design of, and printed out a bunch of banners and started sending those around places. This was one of the big protest days here in San Francisco. It was pouring rain, and I just remember it being this amazing moment the first time we took these sort of data signage out into the street, and people were like, "What the hell is that?" Like they're used to like seeing these like cardboard signs, and I don't want to like denigrate or talk down about the homemade sign, because it's like the single most powerful imagery tool that we have, but it was also something like this. Well, it was weatherproof, which was great in this scenario, but more important than that, it's just something that was taken completely out of the context which is normally in, which is a person interacting with their computer screen, and instead became this data that people could see on the streets. So we got lots of horns honking at us, and people thought it was cool. We had some maps and other representations of data. So what did we learn from all of this sort of journey? I learned that change can happen really, really fast, especially nowadays. This project almost never existed, and because there was 6 of us, 7 or 8 of us that got together that first weekend and just decided let's do this for a weekend. It got off the ground and then became something that sustained itself to a large extent. And I think every person has the power to create something that exists like that. The directory is a great example of something that's scaled a lot since it started, and it's become a really powerful tool for a number of people. And the power of collaboration was unbelievable. Working with people in Chicago, someone designed us a custom infographic font just for Occupy. He was a font designer in Chicago. He just wrote us and said he wanted to be involved. It's like these kind of stories. They started up a chapter in London and started sending us photos of posters that were placed around London. It was really great. And finally, the power of storytelling, which was using these data and numbers to tell the story of the movement, which I thought was fascinating. So how did the course of the project go? Again, that crazy spike mountain over there is the 20,000 hits that we got at the beginning, and it sort of followed the course after that. But even earlier this year, we were still getting like 500 or so people every day coming to the site and checking out the designs and printing out posters and stuff like that, which I never could have imagined from the beginning. I think it was just fascinating. So from a design standpoint, we also learned some lessons. Simple is beautiful. Simple is powerful, beauty is powerful, data is powerful. If you combine all these 3 things, the image is still the single most shareable thing in the world. If you think about how you use your own Facebook pages or social media, if you have them, or just images that stick with you in the course of a day, like a poster. There's video, there's sound, there's like tweets, there's text, there's all these things. But the image is by far, if you look at the statistics, the most shared thing on the internet. These single images, sometimes they're memes or other stories that are being told visually, but we wanted, from a design standpoint, to be this single sort of iconic thing that can tell a story and be self-sufficient within itself. So combining data with that, I think, was really useful. So making it shareable and scalable. So the things existed this big on your screen. It was the exact same image at 4 feet by 5 feet and even larger. Life lessons. Again, we know we're right. I'd say that the most frustrating thing in life is making someone that should care about you care about you. And I think that was what the entire movement was doing simultaneously with millions of people, trying to teach the world these lessons that we know that what we're saying is correct, and we should be able to stand behind it. And we know that the arc of history bends toward justice, in the words of Dr. King. So I think it's a continual struggle, and those images of the 1920s are a great reminder to contextualize this movement. And if not us, then who? Like a week before this thing happened, I had no idea how I would be involved, and I learned a lot about connecting with other people and just saying, let's go do it and try something out, see if it works. And that was the beginning of this story. John Keats, I think, summed up the background of this project pretty well. Beauty is truth, truth is beauty, that's all you know, all you need to know. I think there's something beautiful about the simplicity of information and just saying things that are fundamentally true and spreading that as word. So thanks a lot. Follow us on the web if you want to.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks all the panelists. Robert I'm going to turn this over briefly to Betti-Sue Hertz, who's the curator of the exhibition. It's been kind of inaugurated good discussion. Well, think about it.
So I just want to thank you all for coming, and for Robert Atkins for really spending an enormous amount of time to put this together, and we had many fascinating conversations that have really been spilling out in all of these talks. And I also want to thank the team. Actually, this exhibition was organized by about 5 people, and just is one of them. And especially I want to call out Amanda Bearway, who's here today, who was the primary person who contacted all of the artists and who was able to track down who actually did a lot of the posters that are upstairs, because we didn't really know. We found a lot of images online, and then we had to figure out who made the work. So thank you for everything you've done, and also to Julia Ross and Tian Lam, and our intern Martin Strickland. So I'm just going to kind of try to review some of what I found might have been the key points that go kind of back and forth. Interestingly, we started out with a lot of statistics and looking at sort of the real deal around questions of the 1% and 99%, and we kind of ended up with a lot of facts and the whole question of how facts can work to dispel these kinds of myths or these kinds of censorships or the kind of right wing trying to characterize Occupy movement in a particular way, which we know is completely wrong, making the movement look like a bunch of crazy people, is actually flipping what we really are seeing as we watch